Have you noticed that everything suddenly gets better exactly when you stop worrying? It sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? We've been told all our lives, set goals, fight, achieve. But what if the opposite is true? What if it's our attachments to people, results, and expectations that become the anchor that pulls us down? In relationships, work, and even in the search for inner peace, Carl Jung, the genius of psychology, discovered an unpleasant truth for many. The more desperately you cling to control, the faster life slips through your fingers. And today, we will look at why the ability to let go is perhaps the only way to true freedom. Stay until the end. This simple shift in perception can turn everything upside down. And if you want to learn more about your own psychology, be sure to subscribe to our Telegram channel using the link in the description. We hold fast to our ideas of how things should be. And at this very moment, life seems to be mocking. Everything is going awry. Attachment, which in theory should give a sense of stability, in fact more often turns into a source of constant anxiety. The trick is that all you have to do is unclench your fists, and the world seems to breathe a sigh of relief. Jung spoke about it directly. What you're chasing is running away. What you accept is transformed. We live in a society where eternal race is cultivated, where peace is always somewhere out there, beyond the next frontier. But it is this neurotic need to control everything that prevents real change. It's not about folding your arms and going with the flow, but about a much more subtle transition. From a constant state of tension to a state of conscious observation. Jung, studying the secrets of the human psyche, discovered an important law. While we are obsessed with our fantasies, ideal images of partners, a brilliant career, a happy future, we do not see what is really happening inside us. Of course, it's natural to want success. The trouble begins when our whole personality becomes attached to the result. If I is my position, my relationship, or my achievements, then any failure is perceived as a threat to existence. Hence the eternal fear, gnawing anxiety, and a mad attempt to control every aspect of life. Jung called it a futile attempt by the ego to preserve its illusions. The real change happens not when we hit the wall with our last strength, but when we finally stop resisting the natural course of things, not out of weakness, but out of epiphany. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means letting something new happen that doesn't depend solely on our will. It is an act of trust in the invisible wisdom that guides the course of our lives. And when it really happens, the chaos suddenly makes sense. Opportunities come by themselves without exhausting the chase. And the eternal anxiety is replaced by a strange feeling, as if you are finally present in your own life. Letting go is not giving up on a dream, but giving up the obsession that everything should be exactly the way you intended it to be. It is an exit from the prison of one's own "I must," and an entrance into the spacious room of awareness. But what if it's not about the person we're attached to, but what we've invested in them? Jung was categorical. We almost never cling to another person. We cling to our projections, for the hope that he will give us that confirmation, that love, that salvation, which we miss so much. We assign people to roles they didn't even agree to play, what we don't want to see in ourselves. We search for in others with amazing persistence, sometimes idealizing and sometimes demonizing them. It is in this distorted mirror that the most painful attachment is born. Our ego tries to turn the outside world into its own extension. Assign it like a child assigns toys. The fear of being unnecessary disguises itself as a maniacal desire for success. Hunger is a painful dependence on relationships. What we take to be lofty aspirations often turns out to be just an attempt to plug an inner hole. But no one can live up to an imposed role forever. When illusions are shattered, only bitter disappointment remains. Jung saw this as a defense mechanism of the psyche. It's much easier to blame others than to come face to face with those parts of ourselves that we so diligently hide. But when we finally realize our projections, a miracle happens. Reality is starting to change. The other person ceases to be a screen for our fantasies and becomes just a person with their own advantages and disadvantages. The process of breaking up with illusions is painful, but it gives incredible relief. This is the beginning of an honest relationship. First of all, with yourself. When you stop running after what you think will make you whole, a paradox occurs. You suddenly find yourself closer to yourself than ever. And then, effortlessly, almost magically, everything really starts to take shape. When we stop trying to dominate everything, a space opens up in us for a more conscious presence. In this state, the connection with the world is no longer based on possession, but on genuine intimacy. But what happens when our illusions are shattered? The ego panics and begins to cling convulsively to what is inherently impossible to control. Here, it is important to feel the subtle but significant difference between having an inner direction and an obsessive need to control every step. The first is born out of harmony with oneself. The second is out of fear, artfully disguised as competence. We make plans, try to anticipate all possible options, as if this could give us a guarantee of security. But in reality, such hyper-control is just an attempt by the ego to avoid the inevitable, the unpredictability of life. Jung said that neurosis always becomes a substitute for genuine experience. In this sense, control works like an anesthetic. Instead of feeling, we load our mind with strategies. Instead of facing our vulnerability, we hide behind routine, goals, and promises. To control is not to live. It means existing in an artificial capsule, where we voluntarily sacrifice spontaneity for the sake of imaginary stability. But it is spontaneity that gives color, freshness, and authenticity to life. Without it, relationships turn into a mechanical ritual. Work becomes a painful chore, and even the busiest day loses its fullness. An inflated ego firmly believes that it should and can handle everything. It stubbornly insists that there is only one right way to live, an ideal model of being. And any deviation from this pattern causes feelings of guilt, anxiety, and self-criticism. The mind becomes hyperactive, like an overloaded operating system running dozens of programs at the same time. Mental and emotional exhaustion in this case is not a weakness, but a natural result of such a lifestyle. Deep down, the controller is protection. Protection from surrender. From surrender. But giving up here doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing that there are forces, both within us and in life itself, that do not obey our will. Jung saw the unconscious as a living, autonomous system actively involved in creating our reality. Ignoring this layer, we get stuck in a rational trap, as if all issues can be solved solely at the level of logic. Letting go of control is an act of trust, to recognize that even in chaos there is wisdom, and in the unexpected there is a way. This does not mean a life without landmarks, but rather a willingness to let life surprise us. The more we strive for everything to go according to plan, the further we get away from ourselves. Conversely, when we allow ourselves to simply observe, listen, and feel, without immediate intervention, we begin to notice that life has its own rhythm, and he knows exactly where he's taking us. But what if true freedom lies not in control at all, but in the ego's ability to rebuild itself? This is the moment when the ego, tired of endless attempts to hold everything, finally loosens its grip and turns to something deeper, to the self. The self is the center of our psyche, the integrity of being. It's not a social mask or a role that we play. It's who we are when we stop pretending. While the ego is at the helm, Our lives are organized around external expectations. How should I behave? What is expected of me? Who should I be? The rejection of these imposed ideas becomes the beginning of a movement. Not back to the past, but to the very essence. Jung called this process individuation, becoming who we really are, through the integration of the conscious and the unconscious. This path starts with small breakthroughs. When you stop reacting according to the old pattern, when you realize that you no longer have to support a certain role, when, after parting, you don't rush to fill the void, but stay with her, one on one. These moments of letting go become portals. They don't promise instant comfort, but they open up a space for authenticity. True surrender begins when the ego recognizes its limits, when he realizes that he doesn't need to control everything and know all the answers. It is then that something quiet awakens inside us. The self. She doesn't impose. She doesn't scream. He guides us with clear simplicity. Her cues come not from logic, but from inner resonance, from what makes sense, even if we can't explain it right away. This kind of letting go is far from passivity. This is a more subtle form of presence. To act without obsession with the result. To love is without the requirement of reciprocity. To create is without having to prove anything. In this state, the driving force is not the thirst for recognition, but inner integrity, which does not need applause just to be. In the process of individuation, the ego does not disappear. It is changing its position. Instead of claiming to be the absolute truth, it begins to serve the self. This inner transformation changes everything.